My name is Cara Feeney, and I'm the Director of Exhibitions at the Evanston Art Center. I would like to welcome everyone who's watching this program and introduce Eleanor Spiess-Ferris and Doug Stapleton, who will be having a conversation about Eleanor's exhibit, Daphne's Sister.
So I want to give a brief introduction too. My name is Doug Stapleton. I'm an associate curator of art with the Illinois State Museum, and worked with Eleanor and worked with the Evanston Art Center to put this exhibition together. And for those who don't know Eleanor, she is a well-established artist here in the Chicago community, and she's known for her distinctive approach to the figure, which are almost always women who perform in dramatic settings. And her women are divas. They're larger than life and central to the story of her work. And like all good heroines in a story, are beset by adversaries and circumstance. So as I said, Spiess-Ferris's work is firmly established in the Chicago art history. She's been working for nearly 50 years, shall we say? Give or take a few. And has been an active participant as an artist and as a teacher in the art community. And her work is deeply rooted, has deep art historical roots. We can find Mannerist and Baroque influences in her work. We can find Renaissance influences in her work. We also find symbolist and surrealist approaches to the fantastic, unreal situation. And we also see a very strong strain of feminist thought in the conflation of personal and political realities of women through history, present in her work as well too. So Eleanor, that in turn as introduction to you briefly.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
So let's start with the first slide here, and we're going to start looking at some of the early work, if that's all right.
Okay.
Okay.
Nope, that's not early.
Yeah. So we have this, let's talk about your early work in the 70s, which you often refer to as your New Mexico work. And what are the influences in that work? And this, for example, is a mixed media. It's really kind of a cosmology that you created in about 1975 of your characters that you were starting to develop. So what is this work about?
Well, I grew up with many stories about the family history, my family history, of which many were heroic women. And when I came back from New Mexico to Chicago, I tried to figure out what I wanted to paint. And so I decided I wanted to paint a imaginary world related to New Mexico, and a lot of the characters in these paintings were taken from New Mexico icons, and I remanipulated them as to how they would react in Chicago. Were they able to get on the train and come to Chicago and live here, and what would happen to them? And so that was the basis of this work. Basically, it was trying to figure out who I was. I felt misplaced. And so I brought that world with me and created another world, this world of all of these iconic images, gods, if you will, living in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yeah, Kara, could we have the next slide, please, too? We'll look at one of the pieces that's in the exhibition, a Meadow rainbow in Argyle. So here is one of those figures, and where are they coming from? Because you have some strong, roots in New Mexican, larger New Mexican culture happening in your work.
This is taken after a kachina, that is a rainbow god. And it, again, is my fantasy that the rainbow goddess comes to Chicago. And how is she living with this? Well, she's got her Argyle socks on, and she's doing the best she can. And she's reflected in the sidewalks, and she lives in the buildings and or in the park or wherever she is. And that was basically the idea, is how was I to adapt myself to the Chicago environment and really live here, but carry all of that New Mexican image with me. So here she is, and she's trying to adjust to living in Chicago.
Mm-hmm. Okay, the next slide, Carol. So these are just 3 studies kind of related to the same time period. So you're working with this idea of sort of sacred performance. I mean, you're looking, in other interviews and other writings about you, you talk about the influence of sort of the Spanish Catholic tradition, Mexican Spanish Catholic tradition, the Penitente brothers, but also mentioned the Pueblo, Kachina, this public performances of otherworldly or supernatural forces of the world made present, in the moment. And they have this quality of expressing what's happening in the supernatural, but also commentary about what's happening in the world today. There's a social aspect to it as well. And I think this is these ideas continue into the later work. I'm talking about it now because as we move forward, we keep coming back to this idea of procession and this relationship between the human world and this larger kind of metaphysical world as well. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're very, I mean, you're a historian and you put a lovely wrinkle on things. I just simply was trying to adjust, and these things are all women.
Mm-hmm.
And I was filled with the stories, the stories about my family and how they related to that world. And my mother's cousin owned a art gallery in Taos, and we would go there as a child. I think that most things that I talk about really come from my early childhood. And there on the floor of this wonderful gallery was a piece of art by Patricio Barella, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing his first name correctly, who became quite famous, even had work, he was a folk artist, even had work in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And here was this wonderful snake made out of cottonwood, crawling across the floor, eating a rabbit. And it fascinated me, where all around was work of the great Taos artists, which were nice. They were aspen and adobes, but they were not the thing that grabbed me. The thing that grabbed me was the use of folk art, which really to me came to an inner spirit. On the other side of the room was what is called a death cart, which was a piece of sculpture to be used by the Penitentes, which was a religious organization, and for all I know still exists today, who was a punitive group. And here was this skeleton, beautifully carved in a cart, sitting in a cart, a primitive cart with eyes of mica. And the eyes would glow and shine with the light, and it was surreal. Then on another wall were the retablos of bleeding Christs. And this is the work that I gravitated to, which was more the folk art of New Mexico, not the Victor Higgins or Burning House, but these pieces. And it was on this that I based my work, that I made when I came back from New Mexico to Chicago. What else can I say? I didn't know when I was a kid, I didn't know there was such a thing as surrealism. I learned that when I came to the Art Institute. All I saw as a child were these images created by people who were talking about an inner spirit. And I reused them and worked with them. And I think they are there throughout my life, as are the family stories. Okie dokie?
Yeah, that's great. I wish I had some other images to throw up there quickly, like we had some sketches of your carts and things that you did later on. But let's have the next slide, please.
Okay.
We're going to be moving through your career here. So in this piece, and after that earlier work we saw in the 70s, which had this bright, graphic, kind of painterly loose feel, your work took a shift in the late 70s and 80s with this attention to detail and to volume. And you started to develop a new set of characters. But there is this wonderful, not really precision, but this kind of more depth, shading and volume and space that's coming into the work. And what brought about this change for you? This is this piece we have here, Wild Sticks from 1982.
Ignorance.
Okay.
Ignorance brought it about. I didn't know enough. And so I decided to learn how to create volume. Actually, this is the story of my Aunt Maggie. And these headless characters, because I could not remember what the people actually looked like, I tried to symbolize them in floating garments. Now, the story of my Aunt Maggie, who was a woman who campaigned for women's right to vote and who was a bit of a radical in Taos. The story that I grew up with was that she put on a red dress, something that polite women, good women from good background did not do. And she crowned that by getting on a white horse and parading up and down the streets of Taos, which was something that was horrendous for women of standing to do in those days. But the story came to me of a courageous woman, a woman who was willing to break the rules, to make things better. So this woman in red dress is basically my Aunt Maggie. But then we sort of throw on top of that the four horsemen. And then we throw on the top of that horses, wild horses. Now, if for me to paint wild horses in this environment, everything would be far too crowded. So what we all remember as children are those wonderful hobby horses that we had, well, probably not the young today, but then. And of course, what would happen to them if they became alive? Now, the fun part of this painting, I had a friend of mine make me these angled canvases. And I had painted this painting, or I had this idea in sketch form, and I couldn't solve it until all of a sudden the transparent paper I had fell on the ground at an angle, and I realized that the wall to my right had to be at an angle, and I had to and that would create the stress that I needed. And here are the little horses that are being chased. So there's layer on layer of meaning and thought, but it starts out with the idea of Aunt Maggie on her white horse, parading for women's right to vote through the streets of Taos. Okay?
Next slide, please, Kara. And these are some studies related to, as you were talking about, doing studies and sketches. And and a couple of things that we've talked about in the past is, and what happened in that previous piece is the idea of these early works have this stage-like setting, and many of the early pieces move into these strange interiors where things are moving from one side to another. You described it at one point as moving from here to there. And then these ideas of these volumes, these empty volumes, these ghost figures. The one sketch of the figures piled on top of each other is from a painting that we have.
Right.
I just wanted to include these to show you how you were working early on to develop some of these compositional structures and some of these figures, and also the one on the upper left, which is a kind of like a maquette for a final piece, are the wild horses are outside, and there's like this wild firestorm going on in the distance.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say, except these are basically within that series that I called Ghosts, because they are still related to an ancestor kind of image.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I wanted to emphasize on the one with all the figures stacked up against each other is the tenuousness. Everything has to be tenuous. The ropes are not really attached to the wall, to the hooks. Mm-hmm. And there is a tenuousness, the thing that everything may fall down, everything may fall apart. The people still in the landscape, they're not going anywhere, but they imagine that they're going somewhere. There's always, what can I say? There's always I always tend to use the wrong word for things, but there's a distress that they're really not going anywhere, that they're really not survivors, that they are going to fall to the ground, but they're trying their damnedest to work with what they've got. I don't know if that works.
Your work has the quality of, like, willful or intended action as opposed to what really is happening. And maybe it's like a little bit of not a smokescreen, but like wishful thinking that's happening in your work.
I think so. I think that's a good way to think it. It's wishful. It's, boy, do I hope that rope doesn't fall.
Right.
But boy, do I know that it does.
And by sheer desire, it's not going to. I mean, there's like this willful intention that this is going to happen. And I think with the piece on the upper right, also there's a commentary about like how women perform in society. There's, how can you, in these ridiculous shoes and tight outfits and nothing to hold you to the wall, perform this acrobatic act for everybody that's my reading of it.
And it's still tenuous. And the most important figure in this whole thing is the little tiny person, the smallest person, mm-hmm. holding up, or at least trying to hold up, everybody else.
Yeah.
Which means that sometimes the element we least expect mm-hmm. is the one that keeps us together. Okay.
And I think it's those figures like that move your work from just being pessimistic to this, also have this compassion within them. So it's this smallest little figure that's the one that's holding everybody together. So there's this element of compassion in the work as well too, as well as critique.
Yes.
In my eyes. Yeah.
I think so. I think that everything is a two-sided coin. Mm-hmm. And I try to show the two-sided coin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kara, next slide, please. We're gonna jump a little further on into the
Well, there we go again.
Yeah, did I have that back in there twice? I must have had it in there twice. Let's go again. I'm sorry. There we go. Yeah. So 2002, we're moving forward a bit because we've got Gathering Swans here from, And we've talked about this in the past, and there's a relationship to taboo, not the fragrance, but taboo in this work. And I think this is an early work, or a work where you're dealing with some of the relationship between the human world and the natural world as well too. But what is happening here? Who is this?
Well, all of my work really is based on nature in one way or another, or in family history or family. They're all narrative. Everything is a narrative. The swans. The swan came about because I needed a symbol for the natural world. And I began to do research on, I don't know why, the swan, but I know biblically it's one of the creatures we should not eat. That with the bottom, with shrimp and things of that nature, okay, pork, biblically. And continuing to do the research on who the swan is, I really came across the idea that the swan is hermaphroditic. It's both male and female. It has it becomes the paramour to, is that the word? I don't know if that's a good word, to saints. Mm-hmm. It's against the law to kill a swan in Great Britain. Then there is the idea of the black swan, where people thought that there could never be a black swan until they discovered one in Australia. So we have the black swan effect. So there's so much myth. And then there's Leda and the swan. You have so much myth around the swan. And I decided that the swan was a good metaphor for humanity, for us. And here in this painting, the swan is semi-destroyed, becomes simply a puppet. And I think, now I'm not sure because I change my mind often about what things mean. And I think the viewer should too, because I think that anybody who looks at my work in particular should really be ready to make up their own story. Mm-hmm. To me, this is a figure, the woman here is a nature goddess. And she's coming through the water with all of these swans. And I see her as someone who's trying to heal them or to work with them. And they're not necessarily nice. One is trying to bite her nipple. They're not necessarily good swans or bad swans. They're just nature, which is what nature is. It's neither good nor bad. It is. So I really love this painting. This painting really meant a lot to me because I discovered a whole bunch of narrative. It happened, I painted this painting 2 years after my husband had died. And it is also a painting about grief. And I would say that when my husband died, I went into speaking about my work more about the element of grief and what grief does. And grief, like nature, there's a good side and a bad side to it, if you want to stretch it. So I think that this is a lot about grief. Okay.
Yeah, good. Next slide, Kara. So these are just other both studies for the lower right for gathering swans. And the one on the upper right, which I think was called The Rescue, the final painting, the woman holding the swans.
Yeah.
Yeah. As gloves. And you've used this. You've had these sort of swan-headed women, dancing women, as well as these swan gloves. This relationship between like the person and the swan head, that's some extension that's, looking out or talking to them, and then this actually a little later drawing of with Mandy, the model, where you've taken the hands and moved them into these swan hands. I just really love that relationship, that extension of the human body moving into something else, another creature that's a part of us, but also strangely different as well.
Maybe
So,
it's my wishful thinking.
well, yeah.
Maybe I wish that humans would blend with nature. Maybe it's I don't know. I mean, I find great delight in, is the correct word, the metamorphosis of things? Is that the correct word?
Yeah, I think it is. They're metamorphic pieces, yeah.
I like that there is a communion between nature and the human. The little drawing of the swans coming out of her hands, it ends up that there are two swans, and and this is the final painting, there are two swans, and the background is in fire.
Mm-hmm.
And that painting was done about a year after 9/11. And I don't know if 9/11 influenced the idea, but for some reason, after I'd finished the painting, I felt that there was some subconscious relationship. So I don't know. I mean, like I said, I changed my narrative myself.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody should have their own narrative about the work. I don't really want people to believe my narrative, because then it cuts the fun out of the game. Find your own narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that to you? Why does that happen? Why do you feel that way, about this work? Helping maybe people explore their own attitudes and feelings. Okay?
Yeah, let's have the next slide, please. So moving into this idea of rescue, Island from 2004. So here's that procession that we've talked about that has lingered in your work for ever and ever, and in a wonderful way. But now floating in this, we're out of that sort of the interior into this watery nocturnal world. So let's talk about, I want to ask you about the relationship of water and floating to you. And let's start there. So let's talk about this piece.
Okay, well, let me start with the idea that ideas build on themselves. I will start by saying that I was looking at a newspaper clipping of the wreaths that had been thrown around 2003 at Pearl Harbor over the sunken ships.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at them and I said, oh, that's such a sorrowful image. And I could imagine the sorrow that went into that. And all of a sudden, the ideas began to build on top of that. And then we throw the Titanic in there, and we throw people thrown out into the water. And what does that mean when you're out there and there's no rescue, where there's what is the name of the painting? Oh, is it the Medusa, or what is
the raft? Yeah, the raft of Medusa by
where
Jericho, I think. Yeah.
Right, and here are these people stranded on this ship, and everything's going to go down, and you know that they are not going to survive. And there in the distance is the ship.
Mm-hmm.
and the ship is not going to rescue them. All right. That painting meant a lot to me. So I was thinking, I mean, one thing builds upon another, and you're building a symbolic language. It's not just the wreaths in the water. It's the fact that something happened and the people were stranded. And then what I do is I love the Madonna lily.
Mm-hmm.
And then I float the Madonna lily into the middle of this whole thing. And is that the hope?
Mm-hmm.
Not that religion is the hope, but that there is a purity there. Is that a purity? Is that a hope? Or is the light coming off of this one swimmer, if I use the word swimmer, head the hope with a little angel? Or perhaps the rescue of all these birds in the pointed hat. Perhaps that's the rescue. In other words, you can say, oh, or is it the flowers that rescue? Or is it the blue head, which reminds me of another religion? Is that the rescue? Where is the rescue? Who will rescue us? What will rescue us?
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the water is a sensual aspect of human beings. And the water that is not only that drives us and consumes us, but warms us, is another element that brings all of this together. So I just want to say that symbols or ideas are built. Things are built, and you want to create a depth. And if you want to be able to ask people, what do you see? How do you come into this? What is the narrative that you're looking for in this? There is one person really in this painting that's looking at us.
Mm-hmm.
And I always like the idea that we're here. We're in the water too. We're here floating along. I don't know what's wrapped around your neck or coming out of your head, but we're in this water too. And that central figure is looking at us, and it invites us to come into the narrative, to be part of the narrative. All right?
Yes.
Is that a good enough explanation of this?
Yeah, that's great.
To add just a little bit to this, I didn't know what in the hell I had done. I painted this painting, and I painted it from, if you don't mind, my gut. I had no idea what it meant. And it hung around for a long time. And I knew where it had started, and I knew the struggle that I had with it, but I didn't know what it meant.
It's a different piece for you. It has a different feel than some of the other pieces we'll see later on. And I mean, it's sort of related to Tears a little bit, which is around the same time period. I mean, I think the thing about this is remarkable is this actually the sort of calm, almost not complacent, but the sort of, everyone has a sort of serene, calm look. People are looking around to see maybe what's coming at them or what's coming next, but no one seems to be in particular distress.
They're not struggling, are they?
No, and I like the idea, and the title, Island, like, is the conglomerate, the corporate mass of people, the island? I mean, these are the questions. I don't necessarily have to answer them, but that's what I like about it is, are the islands the little wreaths around them, or the heads themselves the island? Is the whole body the island, the whole mass of people?
That's fun. Isn't that fun when you start
it is. That's why, what does this
mean? Why is there a blue head? I know why there's a blue head there. I struggled with that, and I'm not going to swear, but I am thinking of a swear word.
Okay.
I've struggled with that head.
Mm-hmm.
I struggled. I can't make it be like everybody else. It has to be different. What is it? What will it do? And I talked to that. I said, who are you? Who are you? What are you doing? And how do I make you different? And then finally I said, I know. I make it blue.
Mm-hmm.
And it was right. And I always say, what works, works.
Right.
I don't know why it was something that worked, but it spoke to the whole painting. I don't know why. I don't know why I had to make this fellow with a cone head and all the little birds coming, although that became a symbol that I've used in other work.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Right.
I don't know where it all came from. It just came from someplace else. And it took me a long time to really understand this painting for myself. So,
And next,
okay.
next, Kara, please. Just a study that's kind of related in some way about one of your sketches from a model, but moving into this invention. I particularly like this piece. She feels like she could have been in that previous painting.
Yes.
And that the blue becomes an atmosphere as much as something that she's floating in as well too.
It's ice cream. Have you ever noticed that if you have one bowl of ice cream, you always want a second bowl?
Really?
Yeah, I do. I'm always like, maybe I don't make my first bowl big enough, but it's always like, I would like to keep exploring that. That's sort of a fun idea. Why not keep, and I really got involved in putting these heads of the models in water. And I had to continually feed this idea. For some reason, it was necessary for me to continue feeding the idea of these portraits in water, these heads in water, over and over and over again. It sort of like became an obsession.
Mm-hmm.
And to see, and maybe it was a trying to find the variety of it. You know what they say, variety is the spice of life.
Mm-hmm. We have the next slide.
Huh?
Okay. Because we keep moving with this idea of water and these floating worlds. This is probably what I think your most critical pieces. I mean, sort of dark and inflated ego from, actually I've got 2082. I don't think we're there yet.
No, I don't think so. And God, I don't think I'm going to be around in 2082. But who knows?
Well, maybe this is a peach from the future. This is what's going to happen in 2082.
Unfortunately, that's what I'm afraid, that it might be
it's apocryphal.
Yeah.
So we have the swans, in this case, these inflatable swan boats, and then
they're not nice swans.
No, they're not. They're all biting each other and
that's right, and they have teeth. They're
and
nice
figures. I think we've talked about it before. These figures are no way equipped to survive in this world with their silly costumes and their little tiny parasols and their tiny little cups and saucers for tea. And here they're having, displaying the niceties of civilized life out in this burning landscape. So, what were you thinking with this guy?
I was thinking of the end of the world, if you will. I mean, an apocalyptic situation, and all of us going out into the middle of Lake Michigan to see it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, ignorant people seeing it. Up in one corner, let's see, up in my right-hand corner is Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And across the lake is Gary, Indiana. And the three figures are rather hermaphroditic themselves. Here's my story. You can make up your own story.
Mm-hmm.
I've gone out into the middle of the lake to watch the end of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And they think their egos are so big. Everybody thinks they're going to be a survivor. They think they're going to be a survivor. And they have taken their inflatable swans out, but their inflatable swans are deflating. Is that a word? Deflating?
Yeah.
Deflating each other.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Now, the fun part to me is this crazy fun part is this flower in the middle here is a flower that can kill people. The seeds can kill people. What is it called? I can't remember now.
Is that a datura?
Yes, yes. And if you make a tea out of this flower, of the seeds of this flower, they will put you to sleep permanently. If you put a lot of that stuff in there.
Right.
And so this one character in orange is going to make the tea. Is making the tea. I think in some ways she is the kinder of the three,
Mm-hmm.
because she's going to let them fall asleep before they drowned. All right. That's the narrative. That's the narrative. But what interests me about this painting was the technical. I came upon this wonderful blue.
Mm-hmm.
And blue is supposed to go back, right? But this blue forces the figures forward and forces them into our space. Now you can't see, because of the visual, the photograph, that some of this is very thick,
Mm-hmm.
so that it talks about surface. And so the blue is almost this backdrop that's pushing the figures forward and into our space. And so it's demanding, the blue is demanding that we take note of what's happening to these figures. And I enjoy the technical aspects of something as much as I enjoy the narrative of something, of how do I tell you a story through the technique? How do I enhance the story, if you will, through the work of the technique, the drip, the drawing, the whatever? How do I make it rich or richer for you to view, so that you get involved with a tiny element where you see the reflection of the red on the water, where you see a drip over here, where you see all of these things coming about that creates a rich and exciting, perhaps even a sensual surface. Okay?
Good. Yeah. Let's have the next slide, please. Another piece with a very rich surface, which I wish we could see better. And in some ways, a piece that is opposite in feeling from the previous one. This is Fecundity from 2013. And this is one of my favorite paintings, because this figure is in some ways kind of Madonna-like. I mean,
Yes,
central figure, but she's, hardworking. I think I wrote that if, fecundity is, is a powerful but very precarious force. She's standing in this pool on these twig legs and sort of looking off into the distance at the approaching funnel cloud. This is, again, let's talk about this, what you were thinking about with this piece, because I think there's a lot to be said about her expression in this, as well as her action. I'll leave it at that. So what do you want to say, Eleanor?
Yes, this is taken from a Renaissance figure.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And because I thought that was a figure that of the Madonna or of a nude that we would relate to, that is transcends, all right, the generations. She's not beautiful. She's not pretty. She's an ordinary woman. All right. She has her own beauty. She is nature. She is a nature that has been beaten up She's not whole. She is worried about that tornado that's coming in across the prairie there. She is in, what do the flowers, what are those?
Those are the pansies,
Aren't they? And aren't they, what's their symbol? I can't remember. The symbol is important. Look it up.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't remember.
Okay.
All right. But the symbol of the pansy relates to her. And if you can't see it in this painting, but I found by accident that if I numbered the birds, that heightened the curiosity as to what was going on. So she is a Madonna. She is a Madonna of the earth. She's more optimistic than the others. Technically, what happened when I was painting it, or working on the sketches of this, I wanted to put swans in, but I didn't know where. And I thought about swans everywhere. And then I realized that I don't have to conform. I can be Aunt Maggie. I don't have to conform to anything except myself. What works, works. So I lifted the swans up and gave them their own pool of water. And I also wanted to deal with the idea of surface. So the painting over her head, that became my palette. So I used a palette right on the painting to create the painting, so that you see that it is a painting. And it is a surface. All right. So I'm playing with different things here. But what do you think about this painting?
Well, to me, compositionally, it feels like a scale, balances. And I think I referred to it, I talked about it somewhere as like the tarot card of balance. Because, she's standing essentially on a single point, her legs are together,
Right.
A single fulcrum. And then with these two, swan-filled pools on either side, and just her whole kind of S-curve body just suggests this, this kind of shifting of her weight in order to keep all of this, ecosystem. Her whole body is an ecosystem,
Absolutely,
upright and in balance with everything happening, threatening around her. So she's this really powerful figure of protection and stability within.
Vulnerable. And yet vulnerable.
Vulnerable, yeah. Like those twigs could snap at any point. It's not a lot to stand on. I mean, it's a physically and emotionally very powerful piece for me, and that's why I love it. And this field of pansies is like this, but it's a beautiful, beautiful place where she stands as well. So I mean, there's so many ways that I could see reading that. So.
All right. I like it. I enjoyed painting this painting. I think it was the last really large painting I did. And it was difficult because I was beginning to lose my thumbs.
Right.
So it was difficult. Okay.
All right. Let's go to the next one. Keep moving along here. Small Sound. This is a gouache and paper from 2016. So we've talked about, earlier on, you talked about metamorphosis, and your figures often are hybrids of, there's human and natural forms. And they oftentimes are there's a lot of distortion and contortion in your work. And it makes me think about, it draws the attention to the body. And also even things like the quilted legs, even the costuming of many of your pieces throughout your career suggests this tactile feel, almost like the surface of a pineapple, so there's a visual sense, but there's a tactile sense, and there's also a discomfort that happens in this distortion, this contortion. So do you want to talk about that? Have you think about that at all? Is that?
I think about that a lot.
Okay.
I want the viewer's eye to be titillated.
Mm-hmm.
I want the viewer eye to get excited and to move through the painting and discover elements, to discover things far beyond whatever the painting means, whatever the meaning of anything is. But I want the viewer to enter the painting and to all of a sudden trace it, and their eye become excited and interesting. And why does that change and move? And oh, that feels prickly. And oh, that's a flat pattern. And oh, in other words, it's an element of the layering. That is an element. This figure, this lovely figure, is fecundity. This is fecundity. This is nature.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same woman, really. And I got interested in the idea of pearls and how time is like pearls. And I think that's an old thought. And what happens if the pearls break? And that's why it's a small sound. The sound of time breaking is very small. It's very, very small. And here is fecundity, and she's carrying with her all of the birds as she's hopping along on these very tenuous platforms in this very large body of water. And I don't know if she's going to survive. I do have to tell you one thing. That's a fun story.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see her red shoes?
Yes.
When I was in attendance in 1960 at the Art Institute of Chicago, I saw in the window of a shoe store the most gorgeous pair of red shoes with some sewn embroidery on them, a stacked heel. They were, I drooled at how wonderful they were. And I went into this store and I asked for those shoes, and they brought them out, and they were just as beautiful in real as they were in the reflection at the window, okay? And I tried them on, and they were a size too small.
Mm-hmm.
And then I tried them on again, and it remained that they were a size too small. And I decided when I started painting the figure that the symbol of the unattainable is the red shoes that I wanted so desperately to buy in 1960. Mm-hmm. And so my figures often have the red shoes to remind me of the unattainable, things that you can't have, even though you really, really want them. Okay?
Yes. Well, let's go to the next piece then. And we have the Spill from 2018, another gouache and paper. Right. And again, this, that human ecology, like how all of our relationships between what we do and what we use and what the natural world provides us as part of this larger like cycle or relationship that we need to consider, which I think you do in your work. And this piece in particular, where the figures become almost indistinct, more of a force within the natural world as opposed to like a person walking or moving through it. And in this particular case, like the body is bending over or leaning over and spilling out this head full of everything, birds, flowers, water spilling out into this landscape. So what what do you think about in terms of like what are our actions and responsibilities are to the natural world that you address in your work?
Oh, I don't know how to answer that.
Right. Okay.
I know that this photograph was taken on my rug, so you can
Uh-huh.
see elements of my rug.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I know that the blue figure is fecundity again.
Mhm.
I know that she's spilling these things. Say your question again. What's the
Well,
relationship between?
it's kind of about the relationship that we have to the natural world, like our responsibility, um, and what are your concerns about our responsibility to the natural world? I mean, this piece feels like, I mean, the title, The Spill, sounds like an accident.
It
Um,
might be.
yeah.
Well, I
Um,
think she's trying to, I think we need to refurbish. I don't know, will this pandemic make us realize that that is an absolute necessity, or are we still the real virus?
mhm,
And that has me thinking about, are we really the virus that destroys us?
mhm.
Uh, is that your dog?
Hang
Or
on a second, I'm going to go close the door.
I love it.
He's been in here with me the whole time, just being very quiet, but now I decided to go whine.
So
So,
sweet. I don't know. I think about all of that, and I don't know what the answers are.
mhm,
I know how I feel. I know through experience, through looking at where I grew up. Now 70 some years ago, where I grew up, and I go back to that same area and I see the drought and I see the devastation, and I know from firsthand experience that we as human beings are not very good for this earth. And I don't know if we have the capability of changing that. I really don't know. So in this one, I want the spill, she's spilling it out for us. I mean, she's telling us something. She's saying, look at the beauty, and
yeah,
she's putting it there.
I think this piece, it would probably would have good to show it with some of the other pieces like Pond in the Woods and other pieces where you have these figures where they have these, heads that are pools full of water and birds. And they are about this idea of stewardship,
Right.
of responsibility and stewardship, and then that balance between that. And so this piece feels like it could go either way. It could be spilling out the bounty or spilling out because the stewardship, we can't maintain that balance anymore, and we lose that balance, and then everything goes, out of our control.
Or giving it back to us. I don't know what it means. I really don't. I think that maybe if we behave ourselves, this will be a good omen. If we don't behave ourselves, this will be a bad omen.
Right.
And I think it really is up to us. I was saying to my granddaughter, she was saying that everything feels like a cartoon these days, and that we have the evil element, be it, whatever you want to say the evil element is. But we are looking for a person to save us from the evil element, whatever you might think that is. And I said, unfortunately, there are no supermen, that we are the supermen. And that's the same with this painting. How this painting is viewed in 10 years or 15 years, if anybody views it at all, I mean, it's a tenuous thing. Art's a tenuous thing. It's fragile. But what happens in the next 10 years will depend on how we'll look at this differently. We'll look at this attitude differently. We'll look at the other. Maybe we'll look at it as a positive thing. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. But I did get involved with patterning here. I thought that it would be fun that not only is there a pattern of the pineapple thing, but let's really talk about pattern. So, and let's talk about things that are not formed and ideas and the future that is not formed. And that's why the birds at the bottom are simply sketches. They're thoughts of birds, if you will. Okay?
Good. Yeah. And then the last group of slides here, which this is an installation view at Evanston of some of your larger figure studies drawn from the model, which was sort of the impetus of thinking about the exhibition, was the relationship between studies and sketches and final paintings and how you would come about those. And if we could have the next one too, slide, we have two details. So you've been making studies and sketches throughout your career. You've been teaching, painting and teaching from with the model, working from the model. And you know, these pieces have real time, real space elements to them, you know, real body, but then they have this invention as well too. Much of the symbol system and vocabulary you've used prior to these drawings, you know, coming into them. At what point do you move from observation into this invention in your pieces?
Well, if you put your hands together and you make a combination of all your fingers together, one bleeds into the other. I mean, it's sort of like what came first, the chicken or the egg.
Right.
Sometimes the drawing comes first, and sometimes the idea comes first. And there is no answer to that question because everything is fluid. I can't tell you where one idea lets off and another begins. At some point, the drawing of the human figure gives me a new idea. At another point, something that I'm working on that's more symbolic gives me the idea to take that into the figure. So things, it's like putting your fingers together. Everything bleeds, whoa, what a great word. Everything pushes into each other.
Mm-hmm.
There is no singular way of thinking about it. Everything is a flow, okay? From one thing to another and back again. Okay?
Right. And
You
for
say
the last,
okay a lot, right?
what's that?
I say okay a lot because I
No,
don't
oh,
know.
that's good. That's we have the last slide, please, Kara. You know, and I think that is what is remarkable about your figures, whether it's you know, a pencil sketch on you know, the margin of another sketch, or these, you know, life drawings, which are like this one is like a 3-hour drawing. You know, to the final paintings, there's a point of realization that you've come to where you've stopped, but they are worlds in themselves. Like her, Colette here, from 2016, is a remarkable like presence, and it brings me back to this even your earlier figures from like the 70s, you know, the singular heroine of your work, and here she is in some ways probably grown a little older, a little wiser, and a little more buxom with the years. She's that avatar that moves throughout your career.
Yes, she is.
Yeah.
She has the pearls.
And she's got the
She
pearls.
has pearls. And now whether those pearls came before the other pearls, I don't remember. but she has the pearls of time. And it's not necessarily whole. I don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
This is a person that I really like. She's a great gal. But mostly it's also about trying to express her in a drawing, express that force by how the drawing is put down, how the conte is put down on the paper, by trying to express what the force of the person is. I don't know if you get what I'm talking about or not, because it's so intuitive.
Well, I think it's in the tilt of her head and and her direct stare at us. It's one of the few figures that looks directly, not just looking at us, but is boring into us.
I hope so.
She is probably the most explicit figure challenging us, the way I think many of your compositions challenge us to look and feel about ourselves and the body and the world and so many other issues in a different way. That's why I picked her as the last one, because she seemed
I think that she's looking at somebody over in that direction, but be careful, she's going to turn her eye on you at any minute. At any minute.
I think we fall under her stare in general.
Yeah, I think so. She's gonna be looking at you, kid. At least that's what I hope.
Yeah. Well, that's what I have what I've put together to talk about.
Oh, there we are.
Hello, and here we are. And this has been, well, it's always been a pleasure to work with you and be with you, Eleanor. And I want to thank you, Kara, and also to Paula Danoff at the Evanston Art Center for the opportunity to take the exhibition there.
Mm-hmm.
And,
yeah, it was such a pleasure to be able to walk into work every day and see all of your work.
It was fun. It was so much fun. I'm sorry that the big virus came along and disrupted that, but hey, that's the way things are. It's just like those ropes on those hooks.
mm-hmm.
Sometimes, things go great, and sometimes they don't. So there it is. Thank you, Kara. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Eleanor.